That's right, it's The Simpsons again, because this is a show that has gone on for so long that there are a myriad of different ways that they have approached trans identity, and much like last time, it's nothing good. Now, while we've already covered how Simpsons approached a man pretending to be a woman to succeed in sport and then trick a lesbian, to how a trans person was used as a prop by someone to show off to Marge...
She's a man! Looks like Patty's gonna get something she didn't register for.
Yeah, there's a fair bit of just bizarre trans stuff in there, stuff that really speaks to an absolutely horrific lack of real engagement with trans people and trans issues, because through all of that different stuff, we never really get to have a trans character, as I discovered. But there was kind of one person missing. One person whose complexity of characterization made it so that I felt as if they required their own video. And that's Smithers. Or Waylon J. Smithers Jr., if you want the full name.
Smithers, there's a rocket in my pocket.
You don't have to tell me, sir.
A man of confused sexual ambiguity whose commitment to his boss out of what felt like closeted gay lust was an often turned to joke premise for many of his appearances and interactions. Seriously, it's actually rather hard to say that Smithers was gay until season 27's episode 17 in 2016, when Smithers finally definitively came out as clearly gay and gets rejected by Mr. Burns for what feels like obvious reasons in that regards.
So you have to pretend to be gay, who cares? He's a billionaire.
Now, I'm not getting into the mess of discussing that episode in particular and whether it was good to turn Smithers from being what some people called Burns-sexual into a regular homosexual man, though I will say that the humour being dependent upon the closeted uncertain nature of Smithers' attraction is a bit... well, it's a tad homophobic in its premise, so changing that was and is probably the best thing they could have done with it.
To get Smithers off our backs, I'm gonna find him a boyfriend on this.
But no, I'm not here to discuss any of that stuff. What I am here to discuss is that during the course of Smithers' existence as this questionably queer figure in The Simpsons narrative, he frequently found himself being shoved into transgender camps alongside that, with no seeming rhyme or reason for it. And that's the bit I want to focus on, because the question does really come up a lot, which is Smithers actually just a trans woman who fell into being a gay man instead, and what does that say about him? Alright, that's the introduction done. Let's get to some of those gosh darn examples so you can see what I'm talking about here, and hopefully that I'm not just full of hot air. So our first moment comes to us from way back in 1998, in season 10's episode 8. Wait, 1998 was season 10. My god, I always forget how old this show is. Like, most of the stuff I watch doesn't make it past a few seasons, and yet The Simpsons must be on its, 35th season by this point. God, that's a long time for a show to stick around, and it feels like it's gonna lose any of the magic that kept it going by that point.
Hello, I'm Elon Musk.
Elon Musk is possibly the greatest living inventor!
But yeah, the episode is titled When You Dish Upon a Star, and the main theme of it is Homer befriending a bunch of celebrities due to wacky hijinks, and then discovering that the celebrities hide themselves because of the weird obsessions of the regular people around them. Weird obsessions that we see occur when Springfield finds out about these famous people hidden in their midst, and effectively lay siege to their mansion, demanding things from them. Within that group of people demanding stuff is our character of interest, Smithers, who asks about a pair of red pumps before awkwardly looking around and inserting that he is asking it specifically for his mother, and not for, anyone else, you know?
Where can I get a pair for my, mother? She wears a 12 double E.
It's that pretty clear closeted thing where someone is asking for information about something that is obviously for them, but they put it onto another because of the embarrassment or shame felt around it. As the idea of men wearing women's clothing would be considered at this time period when the episode came out, and well, actually, I guess that kind of shame has sort of stuck around with us due to the hostile society that we live in.
Learning about or discussing LGBTQI plus people in the classrooms.
Yeah, maybe these kinds of jokes and narrative premises have not exactly become unrecognizable with age. Shit's fucked in the US and around the world right now for queer people, and so stories like this involving ideas or based upon a world in which people hide this sort of identity are ones that do actually sadly probably still resonate heavily to this day. But what we see here is that Smithers has some interest in women's clothing, that he wants to obtain some for himself, and that he isn't open with that part of who he is to the world. And therein, in that moment, lies much of the joke for a lot of early Smithers' queerness, that he is clearly ashamed of it, and so does all these gay things without acknowledging it, while we in the audience laugh at his poor attempts to remain in the closet despite everyone knowing.
What'll you be doing, Smithers? Something gay, no doubt?
What?
It does, admittedly, feel a little bit homophobically presented, and I want to quickly say before I move to the next example that none of this one is automatically a trans thing. There is a common stereotype of all gay men being into drag culture, and so Smithers wanting to dress up as a woman could just be emulating that perception of gay men.
Miss Basinger, those red pumps you wore in LA Confidential were...
However, there is also an equally common stereotype that lumps gay men and trans women together into the same amorphous blob, but let's not get into that just yet. I think that one might be best saved for after all the examples.
Same old garbage.
Our next one comes from 2002, in Season 13's Episode 16, titled Weekend at Burnsies. And while that title would make you think that it features Burns faux dying and then being puppeted as the main narrative, you'd be wrong.
Mr. Burns, may I field that one?
That does indeed happen in the last few minutes, but this is one of those more windy road Simpson episodes, starting with Marge doing a veggie garden, leading to Homer beating up a scarecrow to earn a bunch of crows' respect, getting attacked by those same crows when he turns on them, and then going to the hospital where he is given medicinal marijuana, which the Simpsons presents as, well, as how you would expect anything mainstream from 2002 to show weed.
Let Daddy see and hear magical things you will never experience.
It's all very devil's lettuce, weed can mess up your lifestyle stuff. But in the course of that series of events happening, Homer gives some weed to Smithers so that one of them can laugh at Mr. Burns' jokes, which then scene transitions into Smithers wearing a suit that Judy Garland did, and being very proud and confident while doing so.
This suit used to belong to Judy Garland.
It's kind of a similar story to what I previously mentioned in the last example. We are seeing here that Smithers really does like wearing women's clothing a lot, and that he often puts himself into the position of being a woman in scenarios. An element that I just want you to lodge in the old brain cells for when I bring it up later as a reference point.
We could sing a song if you don't mind being Mickey Rooney.
The third example arises for us from 2006. In Season 17's Episode 11, We're on the Road to Don't Wear.
Well, Bart Simpson in trouble again.
In this one, the boys of the Simpson family are off on the road somewhere, and Marge has decided to use their absence to try and sell all the crap in their spaces so that she can buy better knickknacks to replace them. This leads to a garage sale, and one of the boxes of things in that garage sale is a pile of out-of-date painkillers from Homer.
Dexanum, Somnodose, Percolax. Are these for sale?
Which are one of the few things that actually sells, and gets Marge onto selling more of the medicines that the Simpsons have apparently stored up over the years. The Smithers interaction of this is him buying a bunch of estrogen pills, I guess. They're in bottles, which, I mean, they could also be liquid estrogen, like for injecting, but Smithers is buying estrogen, alright? He is getting the estrogen. Estrogen that I have to assume is from Marge for probably dealing with menopause, as that is a pretty normal prescription for cis women to get HRT. When pressed on this rather bizarre purchase from Marge, Smithers uses the excuse that he is getting them for a friend who's trapped in the body of another friend. His classic fallback at this point for covering his own ass when he's clearly talking about or doing something for himself in a comedic manner.
It's for a friend who's trapped in the body of another friend.
Now, as you might be able to see, this one is a hell of a lot more definitively and clearly transgender, rather than just being something that could also associate with the heavy connection between gay men and drag culture. There aren't really gay men out there hunting down estrogen because they feel as if they're trapped inside of a different man's body and want to be in a woman's body for drag purposes. That's a pretty exclusively and strongly trans identity presentation of queer events. Before I get to the final example that matters, I have a quick pit stop one from season 19's episode 14, Dial N for Nerder, from 2008, where in the post-story credit scene parody of Columbo's credits, we see that Smithers is turned into a femme version of himself as Mr. Burns' wife within that credit. A thing that might not seem super important, but is still an essential piece for understanding how The Simpsons often presents Smithers, and pushes him as being this effeminately coded secret gay individual.
I'm sorry, sir. I must have taped over that.
But on the final thing, there is something else that happens between the last example and this one. Something that I mentioned near the beginning of this video. Because this last bit comes from season 29's episode 11, Frink Gets Testy, in 2018, which you might notice is 2 years after Smithers came out as canonically, explicitly, 100% gay man with gay love interests and recognised as gay by the people of Springfield.
Get you a Tom Collins?
Hello, Tom Collins.
Yet, despite that fact, here we see, in an episode on how Frink tests everyone in the town for their intelligence and then releases the scores to predictably horrifying results, because that is a bit of a nightmarish scenario, especially when it's based on one man's messed up, not very good algorithm.
Mandatory test.
Well, when Marge goes to Frink to complain about Bart being labelled as the stupidest person in Springfield, he flicks through the test scores in his cabinet and passes over Smithers' file, which has the words on it as Waylon Smithers, soon to be Wanda.
Hi, Vic. Rechecking.
Now, there are a few things to think from that point. The first being that The Simpsons, despite everything else, is still, from a comedic standpoint, applying trans jokes to the now gay Smithers. Jokes that revolve around the fact that his struggle with sexuality is not actually that, but instead a struggle with gender identity. Secondly, that just because Frink has that listed here doesn't mean it's true or accurate. I mean, look at the goddamn episode it's from, and could just be one man's bizarre transvestigating. Though, how he got that name, I have no idea, maybe just made it up.
Hey, that test is like a son to me. I raised it from a quiz.
And thirdly, that if they ever did intend to go somewhere with this, they haven't really bothered since this point. In fact, there are barely any trans elements at all on The Simpsons, as discussed in my previous video, and in the 7 years after this, Smithers has never really connected to or been suggested in the same space as trans identity ever again.
Haha, no, I'm straight, because I take these injections every 10 minutes.
And so that's all our examples. And where it leaves us is in the answering of the questions at the heart of this. 1. Is Smithers actually trans? 2. What does having all this queer stuff around Smithers mean? 3. Is it in some way positive or negative? A bit of media insertion that we should celebrate, or something we could do without? And 4. Where should The Simpsons go from here with it? Should this be information that gets acknowledged, or is it better left forgotten and buried alongside all the other less favourable trans jokes that they've made in their long time on network TV?
Guys, I broke television, and now you have to help me fix it!
Yeah!
To the first question then, and the idea of if Smithers is or isn't trans is already quite a nebulous one. I mean, we don't have a specific yes or absolute positive from the show. There is no episode about him coming out as trans, and so therefore, from that purely show canonical all bits aside perspective, the answer is no. But all of those narrative elements that we have just considered, most specifically the ones that actually spoke to a trans identity rather than just being forms of feminine expression or interpolations of gay men with women, well, what those examples say is that while Smithers is not trans, there is certainly a lot of questioning occurring around him, both from himself, as we see when he is buying estrogen for a person trapped in another person's body.
It's for a friend who's trapped in the body of another friend.
Estrogen that he evidently did not fully follow through with and continue using long-term enough to come out of that particular closet. Or, I mean, shit, maybe he believed that he could be trans, but upon further introspection he found that he wasn't trans. Or, fuck, maybe he felt as if the pressure was so bad being a closeted gay man that he didn't want to add on top of that by having another identity that deals with bigotry and potential discrimination / exclusion from society and from the outside world.
They don't care about folks waiting until 18, they just want to ban the care, period.
So he just didn't go through with it from that end. I mean, what I'm getting at here is that all of this is not nothings. This is not just allegorical material here. There are explicitly trans-linked things from moments on the side of Smithers. And so it's not unreasonable for people to be seeing those happen and to think that maybe Smithers is hiding another queer skeleton in his closet. Especially considering the fact that he hid being gay for so long. But what that mostly does is bring us nicely to the second question. The question of what does having all that stuff around Smithers mean from a queer angle? And in the course of answering the second question, we're gonna inevitably answer the third one too, because I'm discussing these things and I'm gonna talk about if they're positive or negative while I discuss them, so, you know, that's how my brain works, so that's how I'm gonna structure the video. Get on board. But for one, what this all comes across as, in a lot of ways, is a confusion that extends beyond Smithers in the narrative. I mean, don't get me wrong, it is possible that we are seeing a character who is not sure of who they are for a long time, and so during that long hard journey of figuring out who they are, has tested the waters of a lot of different things. Seeing if they wanted to do cross-dressing and how that made them feel, finding themselves comfortable in women's clothing when they get high, purchasing estrogen because they're debating making that choice, and also possibly either having a name selected out, or there being a random weird scientist who's just gone and figured out your transition name for you.
Important skills of all, discovering huge flaws in my test.
But despite all of that, didn't take that road. That is all possible, but because of the way that this is written, we don't get any of that given to us. The only thing we can take with any confidence from this, directly from the writers and creators themselves, is that Smithers was designed to be a gay man, in love with Mr. Burns at the suggestion of one guy originally. That a lot of the jokes were built around the idea that he only loved Mr. Burns and was a Burns-sexual, and that his inability to openly come out created comedy.
You'd kneel before me?
Boy, would I.
Yes.
And that when this eventually came to a head, Smithers became just a gay man who dated men. That's how the show handled this. And as you might be noticing, there is no mention in that story of Smithers questioning gender or approaching his gender identity in any way, shape, or form. And so this leads back to the idea that all of these bits we are seeing are not character motivated bits, but are instead joke/writer motivated bits. In the sense that the writers themselves were not immersed enough in queer culture to be able to distinguish between Smithers as a gay man and trans woman, drag queens, and ultimately womanhood. This is, as I have said a little bit already, not an uncommon piece of background bigotry that I see very often. And I call it background because it isn't the open fiery slurs or condemnation. It's just the reiteration of mixed messages which places all queer people into the same monolithic camp as one another. A reiteration of stereotypes and of common misconceptions which furthers both of them by being in such a famous and watched show that other uninformed people are going to see and internalize.
This suit used to belong to Judy Garland.
The idea that all gay men are into drag and are invested in wearing women's clothing. The stripping of manhood from a gay man by basically conflating him with being the same as a woman. The belief that gay men and trans women have the same goal, sleeping with men, and are approaching that goal from just a different point of view and are therefore basically interchangeable, that gay men would transition for the purpose of more easily sleeping with those they want to sleep with.
I'll take all your estrogen.
That's a female replacement hormone.
These are themes and ideas that I have seen time and time again, both in fiction and in real life. They have spread by virtue of the fact that creators like The Simpsons didn't bother challenging them at first, and instead just incorporated them into their comedy in a way that normalized those perceptions further. So, yeah, from my standpoint here, it's all pretty damn fucking negative at this point. But that brings us to our final question. The question of what should be done then? And this is one where I don't think there is a really easy right answer, but I would argue that there are two useful directions to go in. The first would be to, outside of the show, admit these flaws. Admit these mistakes were made in how Smithers was presented, and that he was always intended to be just a gay man, and then continue from there. Come on, let's celebrate. Personally, I don't really like that one too much, because it seems as if it's just denying all the narrative that was done previously, and basically kind of begging the audience for a reset on the whole thing, when I think that there could be more value derived from my second option I'm presenting. This one sees us have an episode or two centered on Smithers, where he does consider his gender identity seriously, and we learn through that how he had pushed himself into the idea that he might be a trans woman because of how he was dealing with a lot of his conservative ideology. And for those who don't know, it's pretty clear when you read into it how Smithers is absolutely a Republican, and I'm thinking, why not lean into that?
We're gay. We're glad.
But don't tell Mom and Dad.
Lean into having Smithers talk about the ways in which he didn't want to be gay or be seen as a gay man. So he tried hiding it, And he tried different ways of living that would let him be straight while still being into who he wants to be into. And yet ultimately it all came to a fore and he had to come out as who he was.
My heart is covered in burn.
Follow the thread of interpretation of the character as all of these bits being part of his story of exploration, and present that on TV. It lets you use the narrative that you have built in the past. It lets you make it so that all those negative connections that I have made to Smithers as gay as trans or gay as woman, it lets you turn those from being the show's bigotry to being Smithers' personal self-hate around his gay identity, and his own flawed attempt to address it. It would also, if handled well, be a pretty damn good thing to see on a mainstream TV show, because we really don't get a lot of narratives like this.
Hi, Vic. Rechecking.
Ultimately though, these two options are still miles better than what The Simpsons really went with, which was to just kinda keep making little digs at it around Smithers and then stop. No explanation, no addressal, nothing. Decades of contributing to these ideas, to presenting stereotypes, and then one day turn around and act like it all just never happened because he's gay now. That is a much worse way of doing this, but not one that I find unexpected after my last video on trans stuff in The Simpsons. Like, we need to face it that this show just sucks when it comes to the queer community in a lot of ways. It gets praise from people for all the gay man stuff, but none of that crap means a lot for the entirety of the LGBTQ+ community, and doesn't make it a queer positive show.
I'm not a villain, I'm a transvestite.
Explain that to your maker.
And that's the video. That's all my thoughts on The Simpsons, as long as they don't make like a trans episode or something next year or some shit, in which case I guess I'll be back. And I hope that you enjoyed it, or found it interesting, or at least found me acceptable enough to exist on another screen while you did something more important. That's exactly what I'm aiming for, and so to achieve that is fantastic by me. If you really liked what I did, a great way to show that is by going to my Patreon or my Ko-Fi and subscribing there. Those in the $5 and up category should be scrolling past the screen right now, and I really appreciate all of you for helping to keep this channel going and funding what I'm doing. It helps to pay for things like my rent, power, internet, food, and cat, all of which I like to have so that I can keep doing what I'm doing here. I have a lot more videos to come, a ton more ideas, and so much more things I want to explore because this is my passion. I love talking about shows like this and looking into this kind of fictional exploration and thinking about it, even if my recording and editing skills might be a little bit on the lackluster side. I mean, they're still better than 5 years ago when I started doing YouTube, so in another 5 years, these might almost look like professionally made videos. But yeah, I also want to say a big thanks to all the people who watch this video, who subscribe to the channel, who comment with new ideas for me to look into, and who click on my other content and check that out. Fuck the algorithm, who gives a shit about what that nebulous trash thinks, but I really appreciate it when people interact with my channel like that, and I think that's more important. So one more huge thanks to just everyone involved in any way with this channel, and I hope that you all have a great day.